What's going on, everyone? So I want to talk about something that I think is probably the most misunderstood part of the entire college application process. And honestly, when I first started doing this, I didn't understand it either. I had no idea, and I think I got rejected from like most places I applied to because of this exact thing, right? And the thing I want to talk about is narrative, all right? And before you click off and be like, okay, I've heard this word before, I want you to hear me out because I think the way most people explain it is wrong. And I'm going to try to explain it in a way that actually makes sense. So let me just show you something really quick, all right? So picture this. You've got an admissions officer, right? And he's going all crazy because he's got like 50,000 applications he needs to look through and he only has 2,000 spots. So they're going through these folders, right? And most of the people in these folders have really good grades, right? Good stats and everything because the reality of the applicant pool of these schools is just insane, right? And so the question becomes, what actually separates people, right? Because everyone has a 3.9 and a 1550. Those things don't separate you. They're just the entry ticket. So what actually separates people? And so when I started interviewing students, and I really like 50 plus students who got into schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, I kept noticing this one thing. Every single person who got in could explain themselves in one sentence. Not like a fancy sentence. Just like, this is what I'm about, this is my thing, and everything they did kind of pointed back to that one thing, all right? And then the people who got rejected, and I worked with a lot of students who got rejected, including myself. The common thing was that they had a bunch of stuff they done, right? Debate, NHS, hospital volunteers, science fair, violin, which is fine. That's impressive. But when you asked them what it all meant, what the through line was, they were empty. They couldn't tell you. They'd be like, oh, I'm well rounded. And I was like, yeah, but so is everyone. So this is what I call the vending machine problem, where you press a button and something comes out, but there's no story that connects each of these things to why is this person even doing these things. And so what's a narrative? Okay, so here's how I think about it. And this is the simplest way I can explain it, right? Your narrative is basically, why do all of these things make sense together? Right? And what is the reason that you do what you do? And when you can answer that, that's your theme. All right? And let me give you an example. I think examples make this make sense way better than just explaining the concept. So let's say you're a first-gen student, right? Your parents immigrated here, they struggled with English. You basically started translating for them when you were 10 years old. Like going to the doctor with them, going to the bank, translating, right? And then as you got older, you got into coding and you built some tools and you like UX design. Now without a narrative, that students write their application and it says, I'm a first-gen student. I'm good at coding and I did some projects, right? With the narrative, that student says, I designed for the people that technology forgot, and then suddenly everything makes sense, right? Of course it makes sense. Of course you translated for your parents. Of course you care about multilingual UX. Of course the app you built targeted underserved communities. And now it all clicks. And that's the thing. When an admissions officer reads a really good narrative, they don't think, wow, that's impressive. They think, of course this person is applying here. Of course this is what they want to do. It feels inevitable. And that's what you want. Okay, so another example. Let's say you're someone who grew up between like 3 different countries, right? Maybe you moved a lot and so you never fully belonged anywhere, right? Kind of felt like you were always the new kid or like you existed in this in-between space. So you start a podcast interviewing other kids who grew up like that. And then for your research paper, you write about identity formation in third culture kids, right? And then your main essay is about the night you realized you couldn't answer the question, where are you from, right? Without feeling weird about it. That's a narrative. The theme is something like, I document what it means to be human between worlds. And now all of it makes sense, right? All of it points back to the same thing. And so the question I always ask students is, if I remove your name from your application and gave it to someone, would they be able to figure out who you were just from the patterns of your activities and essays? Like, would it feel like one person? And honestly, for most students, the answer is no. Because most students are building their application to look impressive rather than to feel cohesive. And that's the thing. Impressive gets you past the stats cutoff. Cohesive gets you in. Now, one more thing I want to talk about before we wrap up, and that's the personal statement, because this is where I see the most people mess up. And that's not that they can't write, it's that they write the wrong thing, all right? Most people write their personal statement as a summary of everything they've done, like a narrative version of their activities or the resume. And look, I get it. It makes sense. You want to show all of your activities, all of your awards. You don't want to flex on them, right? But that's not what this essay is for. Your activities section already has all of that. What the personal statement is for is to show the reader who you actually are, like a small window into how you think and how you see the world. So the best personal statements I've read, and I've read a lot of them, they all start with one really specific moment. Not a theme, not a conclusion, a moment. Like there's a boy in room 4B of the hospital who hadn't spoken in 3 days. Something very specific. And then from that one moment, you zoom out and you show the reader what that moment meant. And then by the end of the essay, you're not telling them that you have leadership or compassion or whatever. You have to make them feel it. And you're going to be able to do it only when there's a story behind it, right? So you have one specific moment, what it means, and how it connects to who you are, and that'll be your theme, and that'll lead you into your narrative. So if I were to summarize everything I just said, and I know this was a lot, it would be this. Your stats, they get you considered, right? But your narrative is what gets you in. So find your theme, which is the one sentence that explains why everything you do makes sense together. Make sure all your activities are basically different expressions of that theme, and then your essays are just that theme in story form. And if you can do that, you're not just another folder in the file. You're the folder that they will remember. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to be making a lot more videos on this stuff, so make sure to subscribe. And if you're working on your application right now and you want help figuring out your narrative, link in the bio or just DM me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, leave a comment and let me know what you thought. I'll catch you in the next one.